When you think of the most dominant defenses of the 70s, the Steelers, the Vikings, and the Cowboys are the first that come to mind. A team that doesn't get enough credit, the LA Rams. From 1973 to 1980, they allowed the fewest points, the fewest passing yards, the fewest rushing yards, and tied for the best win percentage. Given those stats, why don't they get enough recognition? It was thanks to a series of painful playoff losses. That story begins in the 1972 offseason. After a disappointing 6-7-1 season, the Rams made some changes heading into 1973. First was hiring head coach Chuck Knox, who told the owner, "I don't think I can win in the NFL, I know I can." Bear in mind this was his first head coaching job. The Rams also traded their quarterback, Roman Gabriel, to the Eagles. The best thing they got from that trade was star receiver Harold Jackson. To replace Gabriel, they traded for Charger quarterback John Haydel. Although 33, Haydel still had a Pro Bowl season in 1972, and his almost 27,000 yards were the sixth most in NFL history. The defense would set the tone for the next half-decade almost immediately. They held the Falcons, who had finished with the 7th best offense that season, to 2 first downs, 2 completions, and 17 yards for the entire game. However, their biggest tests would come in Week 5 against the Cowboys. During the 70s, the Cowboys and the Vikings ruled the NFC. The Rams, who hold the best win percentage of those three, was a close third. Today, Harold Jackson was consistently open as he gashed the Cowboys for 238 yards, which was then the 10th most in NFL history, and 4 touchdowns, which was a team record. Roger Staubach was intercepted 3 times, his final coming with less than 3 minutes remaining, which sealed a 37-31 Rams victory. Just 2 weeks later, they were facing the Vikings, the only other undefeated team in the league. They barely lost, 10-9 in a defensive slugfest. Then after a loss to the Falcons the following week, the Rams proceeded to rattle off 6 consecutive wins. That gave them 12 for the season, the most in franchise history. Chuck Knox's guarantee panned out, and he was crowned Coach of the Year. The Rams' defense had finished 4th in points allowed, but their front four was the most dominant part. They had 45 sacks, which tied second, and they were led by 14-time Pro Bowler Merlin Olsen. Jack Youngblood would emerge getting his first Pro Bowl selection, and finished second in the league with 16.5 sacks. Fred Dryer had 10 sacks, which included a then record of most sacks for safeties in a single game, coming up with 2 against the Packers. And Larry Brooks finished with 9 sacks of his own. But while the defense was excellent, the offense stole the show. This would be the only season during the 70s when the offense had a better ranking than the defense. Running back Lawrence McCutcheon would be a steady presence during the 70s, and he finished his second season with just under 1,100 yards, which was 4th most in the NFL. He was led by a solid O-line that included Hall of Famer Tom Mack. John Haydel threw 22 touchdowns to just 11 interceptions, and thanks to Harold Jackson, he tied first with 14.9 yards per completion. They'd take that number 1 offense to Dallas for the divisional round. Despite having the fewest turnovers and second fewest interceptions in the league, on the first play of the game, John Haydel threw an interception at their own 26-yard line. 3 quick runs and the Cowboys were in for a touchdown. Then on the Rams' next offensive possession, they fumbled, and it was recovered by the Cowboys at the Rams' 34. With such good field position in both situations, the Cowboys got 2 quick, easy scores. While the regular season was the year of the offense, it was the defense who kept the Rams in this game. After those 2 early scores, they then allowed only 3 more points until late in the 4th quarter. But the Rams' offense struggled, with several drives only ending with field goals. So the Cowboys held on to a 17-16 lead with less than 10 minutes remaining. Despite taking a knee to the head early in the first quarter that left him dizzy, on 3rd and 14, Staubach rifled the ball to rookie Drew Pearson in between 2 Rams defenders. He caught it in stride and sealed the Rams' fate. With that, they lost 27-16. The Rams would start 1974 3-2, so Chuck Knox had to reevaluate the roster. John Haydel, now 34, had thrown 5 touchdowns and 6 interceptions and completed less than 50% of his passes. Green Bay saw this and thought, yeah, he's the final piece we need to win. So the Packers sent 5 draft picks for the 34-year-old QB. The Rams were not regretting that decision when Haydel's replacement, James Harris, completed 80% of his passes for 276 yards against the 49ers the following week. The offense did regress this season. They scored 9 less points a game and only had 2 games where they scored more than 30 points, versus 7 the previous year. However, they still went 7-2 with Harris, and he would get selected to the Pro Bowl. But credit should go to the defense, who got even better this season. Dave Elmendorf and Charlie Stukes both had 7 interceptions, which tied 6th in the NFL. Fred Dryer and Jack Youngblood were absolute menaces, tying 1st in the NFL with 15 sacks each. The Rams finished with 44 sacks, the second best total behind only the Steelers. While their defense was first in fewest points allowed, it was their run defense that was particularly great, allowing just 4 touchdowns the entire season. As a result, the Rams would win their first back-to-back division titles since 1949. They also hadn't won a playoff game since 1951. Now in the divisional round, they hosted the Redskins, who had the 4th best offense in the league. Despite the Rams forcing 6 turnovers, they were clinging to a 3-point lead in the 4th. Then All-Pro Isaiah Robertson returned a 59-yard interception for a touchdown to win 19-10. But who's that waiting for them in the conference championship? The Vikings, who they already beat 20-17 in week 11. In a low-scoring affair, the Vikings held on to a 7-3 lead at half. Then on this heroic play, the Rams reached the Vikings' 2-yard line. As they inched closer to the end zone, an offside penalty pushed them back 5 yards. Now they were forced to pass. The ball was deflected and intercepted. That would be one of 8 turnovers this game, 5 coming from the Rams. A really sloppy game, and once again, the Rams came up short. They hoped to shake off the disappointment of 1974 in the 1975 opener against the Cowboys. Instead, they lost 18-7. But they did respond with 6 straight wins, which included holding the Colts, the second best offense that season, to just 13 points. Even though the Rams had the number 1 defense in 1974, they somehow got even better in 1975. But they weren't just the best in the league, they were one of the best of all time. They allowed just 9.6 points per game, the 3rd lowest in NFL history, even better than the historic 1976 Steelers. The team boasted 5 Pro Bowlers on defense, which was tied for their most in a single season during the 70s run. But what's particularly impressive is they did this despite losing key starters, Larry Brooks and Charlie Stukes. One of their best performances came against the Steelers in the final week of the season. The Rams had lost James Harris to a shoulder injury, so backup Ron Jaworski was getting his first start. Even though they were riddled with injuries, they won 10-3. The Steelers had already clinched home field advantage for the playoffs, and Bradshaw sat the second half, but it was still an impressive win. With Harris still nursing his injury, it wasn't clear who was starting for the divisional round. 3 minutes before kickoff, Jaworski was informed he'd be getting the start. The defense would lead the way, allowing just 95 rush yards, even though the Cardinals averaged 171 that season. They also intercepted Jim Hart 3 times, returning 2 for touchdowns. Lawrence McCutcheon's 37 attempts was a playoff record that still ranks 4th, and his 202 yards was also a record, which still ranks 7th. With that, the Rams beat the Cardinals handedly, 35-23. For the conference championship, a healthy James Harris got the start, but after a couple unsuccessful drives and an interception, Jaworski got subbed in. As you'll see throughout this video, the defense would keep the Rams in these playoff games as long as they could, but the offense could never capitalize. However, this was not one of those games. As one writer quipped, there were 6,555 no-shows at the LA Coliseum Sunday. Among them were the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams, who had one of the best defensive seasons in NFL history, were embarrassed 37-7. At this point, the Rams were considered big game chokers. They, quote, faint at the sight of a Super Bowl. 1976 saw more changes at quarterback. With James Harris fracturing his thumb, Jaworski was the starter in week 1, but then he fractured his shoulder in the game, which forced rookie Pat Haydel to take over. The Rams would alternate between starting these 3 quarterbacks over the next few weeks, but by week 10 Haydel was the starter. Through this drama, the offense still improved, finishing 3rd in points scored. Lawrence McCutcheon remained consistent, rushing for over 1,100 yards, which was 5th best in the league, and leading the team with 9 touchdowns. And of course, the defense was still rocking. While they were right in the middle for pass yards a game, they had the most interceptions and 4th fewest touchdowns allowed. Bend but don't break, so they allowed the 3rd fewest points per game, behind just the Steelers and the Vikings. Once again, they won their division, and once again, they were facing the Dallas Cowboys in the divisional round. The embarrassing loss remained fresh on their mind. While the previous matchup was a one-sided blowout, this game was a defensive chess match. The Rams intercepted Starback 3 times and sacked him 4 times. The Cowboys retaliated, intercepting Haydel 3 times. They even blocked 2 punts, the second coming with a minute 52 remaining in the game. At the Rams 17, the Cowboys were down 14-10. Starback's first 3 attempts went incomplete. Then on 4th down, he connected with tight end Billy Dupree. Dupree thought he got the first down. The refs did not. So the Rams were able to run out the clock with a meaningless safety, winning 14-12. But now they were on to Minnesota. They started off well on their second offensive drive. They marched down to the Vikings' 1-yard line. However, after a failed quarterback sneak on 3rd down, the Rams settled for a field goal. Only it would be blocked and returned for a 90-yard touchdown. Chuck Knox is accused of being too conservative. They called him Ground Chuck. They were first in rush attempts in the NFL during his time, but 25th in pass attempts. Now a few inches from the goal line and you kick a field goal. I know it's 1976, not 2024, but surely you go for that. Even though the Rams were able to hold the Vikings to 89 net yards in the first half, they were down 10 points. The offense, even the special teams, were of no help. A fumble at the Vikings' 20-yard line, a blocked punt recovered at the Rams' 8, and an interception. 2 minutes into the second half, running back Chuck Foreman was able to break free for a 62-yard run. A couple of plays later, the Vikings scored. It was now 17-0. The Rams were able to narrow the score within 4, but an interception later in the fourth ended any hopes of a win. The Vikings got one more touchdown and won 24-13. Despite 3 straight title game losses, entering 1977, the Rams were tied second for favourites to win the Super Bowl. But they needed a better quarterback, so they traded Jaworski to the Eagles and Harris to the Chargers. Then, they signed a 34-year-old Joe Namath with 2 knees that were barely serviceable. After a brutal 4-interception performance against the Bears in Week 4, Namath was benched for Pat Haydel. Despite them lacking a great quarterback, they were still able to rely on Lawrence McCutcheon, who rushed for over 1,200 yards, 3rd in the NFL. And we can't forget the star of this video, the defense, which ranked 2nd best this season. They won their 5th straight division title and were heading to the playoffs to face the Vikings again. But Fran Tarkenton had broke his leg in Week 9. They still managed to win their division with backup quarterback Bob Lee. Even though this game was in LA, the sun was not around today. I present to you the Mud Bowl. The Rams were 10-point favourites, they were at home, they'd blown the Vikings out in the regular season, and the Vikings were led by their backup quarterback. Yet Haydel threw 3 interceptions, one coming in the final moments of the game in the red zone. The Rams lost 14-7. It's true Chuck Knox was extremely conservative, but their Achilles heel was the quarterback. So far they had gone through 5. The rest of the team was excellent. We've seen how consistent the defense was. From 1973 to 1977, Lawrence McCutcheon was a Pro Bowler and rushed for 1,000 yards in all but one season. Howard Jackson, and later Ron Jesse, would prove to be reliable receiving targets. That being said, the run game was their bread and butter. They had the 6th best offense from 1973 to 1979, but if we take a look deeper, they ranked 12th in passing yards and 13th in passing touchdowns, whereas they ranked 2nd in rushing yards and 6th in rushing touchdowns. The Cowboys had Roger Staubach, the Vikings had Fran Tarkenton, the Steelers had Terry Bradshaw. The Rams had a collection of quarterbacks who combined for these pretty average stats. On top of all that, they had to face the Cowboys and Vikings each year, teams they simply couldn't overcome. Then, following ongoing disputes with the owner, Chuck Knox resigned in 1978. Despite an excellent regular season record, he left behind a less than impressive playoff record. George Allen returned as head coach, but he was extremely demanding, so several players ended up rebelling. After just 2 preseason games, he was fired, and defensive coordinator Ray Malavasi was promoted to head coach. Despite a weird start to the season, the Rams still went 12-4, won another division title, and secured another playoff matchup against the Vikings. But the Vikings' once vaunted defense was now old, ranking 20th of 28. The Rams finally scored more than 2 touchdowns against the Vikings in the playoffs, blasting them 34-10. Up until now, the most touchdowns the offense had scored against the Vikings or Cowboys was 2. Speaking of the Cowboys, they were next up. Roger Staubach suffered a concussion the previous week, but hey, this is 1978. A concussion is like an annoying itch. Even though the Rams would commit 7 turnovers, the game remained close with it scoreless at halftime. But then in the second half, 2 interceptions at the Rams' 10 and 20 yard line allowed Dallas to get 2 easy scores. Now down 14-0, the Rams looked to chip into that lead. But instead, they fumbled at the Cowboys' 10 yard line. The game was over at this point. The Cowboys scored on their next drive, and a pick 6 finalized a humiliating 28-0 loss. Those 7 turnovers brought their total to 25 in their playoff losses. That's an average of 4 per game. No wonder they had 4 title losses in 5 years. 1979 seemed to be the end of the Rams' run. Halfway into the season they lost 10 starters. But if you watched their Week 10 matchup, you wouldn't have known. The Seahawks were averaging 202 yards and 22.5 points a game in their first 9 weeks. The Rams' defense had allowed 20.5 points and 178 yards a game. The entire roster, again, was decimated. The defense allowed 70 points in their last 3 games, so the Seahawks were favored. The Rams' game plan focused on containing quarterback Jim Zorn, who enjoyed scrambling. It worked. They held the Seahawks to an NFL record -7 yards total. That was 23 rushing yards and -30 passing yards. The only thing is, quarterback Pat Haydel and running back Wendell Tyler got injured. Jeff Rutledge took over for Haydel the following week, but after a miserable performance, he was benched for Vince Ferragamo. Now 5-6, the Rams' streak of NFC West titles and playoff berths looked over. Ferragamo had never had an NFL start, and he threw just 35 passes in his first 2 seasons. But with him, something clicked, and they finished 4-1. His stats weren't anything special, but the biggest difference between him and Haydel was his stronger arm. The Rams made the most of that, as they went from 10 yards per completion and 5.4 yards per attempt in the first 10 games, to 14.4 yards per completion and 7.3 yards per attempt in the final 5 games. No more ground chuck. While they had made the playoffs, expectations were not high. Well, Ferragamo had ice in his veins. Against the Cowboys, he threw 3 touchdowns, which included a 50-yard pass with just over 2 minutes left to seal a 21-19 victory. While the defense had taken a step back this season, their leader, Jack Youngblood, would finish with a league-high 18 sacks. But against the Cowboys, he fractured his leg. Out for the rest of the season, you say? Ha! He would play the remaining playoff games and even the Pro Bowl. With the defense rallying around Youngblood, they held the Buccaneers scoreless in a 9-0 win in the NFC Championship game. There they were, in the Super Bowl, after so many close calls. It's crazy because this was their worst defense. The team was decimated by injuries, and they had the worst record of any team to play in the Super Bowl. To make matters worse, they were up against the defending Super Bowl champions, the Steelers, who had the number 1 offense and the number 5 defense. But the Rams were hot. The Steelers averaged 162 rushing yards a game, but the Rams held them to 84. Ferragamo completed 60% of his passes for 212 yards, against a team that allowed just 160 pass yards a game, and a league-low 47% completion rate. There were 7 lead changes in this game. Unquestionably, the Rams' best performance of the decade. Up 19-17 in the fourth quarter, the Rams were quietly confident. But as a wise man once said,
"Great teams aren't always great. They're just great when they have to be."
That was clear after a 73-yard touchdown pass to John Stallworth, which broke the game open for the Steelers. It was actually the result of blown coverage. Safety Eddie Brown was supposed to help Perry in the middle, but instead he let him past, and in single coverage, Stallworth pulled in the touchdown. But after 3 and outs by both teams, the Rams did have one more chance. They marched down the field from their own 16 to the Steelers' 32. Then Ferragamo threw a pass that haunts him to this day. A pass that went straight into the hands of Jack Lambert at the Steelers' 14 with less than 6 minutes left. A few minutes later, a Franco Harris touchdown would seal the victory. A devastating loss in what many said was one of the best Super Bowls ever. 1980 was truly the end of the Rams' half-decade of dominance. They had another 11-win season, but they lost their division for the first time since 1972. Oh, and this shouldn't surprise you, they lost to the Cowboys in the playoffs. Alas, that was the story of the Rams. One of the most dominant defenses of the 70s, but yearly failures in the playoffs against the Cowboys or Vikings meant a lack of publicity.